Good evening, YouTube viewers and subscribers. What I have on my bench today is an engine that I have never ever had before. It is a YS F-120 engine. Those of you that are really glow fanatics will be familiar with the YS engines. This is an engine brand that I've just never owned before, and I really have no reason for that. This engine came out, this particular version of the engine came out in around 1988, and I believe that's about the vintage of this engine. Now, YS is a very successful blow engine company. The Futaba is the company that makes them. Obviously, those of you that are in RC know that Futaba makes a lot of radios and that type of thing. Well, they also make engines, and they make very incredible engines. So this is a quick look at this OS FS120 engine, and I know next to nothing about YS engines. But in the last 24 hours since receiving this engine, I've learned about as much as I can in that short a time. And I've learned that this engine has really good compression, but I can't run it. So this is not the prelude to a box to the bench review. This is going to be the prelude to an inside look. Because of the design and the complexity of the YS engine, I don't feel comfortable just putting a prop on this thing and mounting it on my stand and just trying to run it. These things are considerably different than most normally aspirated four-stroke engines produced. And I have to admit that I was quite shocked because a really awesome RC group member, his name is Jim, actually just gave this engine to me. So thank you very much, Jim, for the opportunity to run and examine this engine. It's an incredible opportunity that I ordinarily wouldn't have done because I don't normally go seek YS engines. But anyway, let me try and tell you some of the things that I've learned about YS engines. If you look at this carburetor, you'll see there's not anything missing here. This is actually an air intake. Now, YS, these engines operate on a somewhat different principle. They're somewhat fuel injected, somewhat supercharged. There's some terms that have been used in a 1989 review of this engine by Stu Richmond, which this is the exact engine that he reviewed, and I can put a link on the video to where that review is. So this is actually the air intake, but this engine has down here is a fuel regulator. So it actually pressurizes the fuel tank, and that pressure just more or less injects fuel into this engine or into the carburetor. So that being said, this is one of the main reasons I don't just feel comfortable just putting this on a bench and running it. Just because of the fact that this fuel regulator has a silicon diaphragm in it, and if that's not working properly, if it's split, damaged, degraded at all, this isn't going to run, so it would just be an unsuccessful run. So in my opinion, the best thing for me to do with this engine is spec out all of the different gaskets that I might need for this engine before I run it. And as you see, I don't have an exhaust for this, so I need to purchase an exhaust for this engine. But I'm going to spec out all of those things and then begin the disassembly process, because I don't want to run this engine until I know that all the gaskets are in place and they're all good, and especially the gasket for this fuel regulator, and that the silicon diaphragm in there is in good working order. Now you'll notice on this that there's all these different nipples. Well, another thing that comes with the YS engine is this particular nipple here is actually where you would connect your main fuel line that's sucking fuel from the tank. So let's pretend like I've got a tank here, and you always want to filter fuel going into this engine because of the delicate nature of the fuel regulator. So that's why there's this inline fuel filter. So say this is going to the tank, and then there's this other nipple here, and what gets connected there is another section of tubing with a check valve in it, which only allows airflow to go in one direction. So that would be connected here. So as the prop rotates, a differential of pressure is created, and the pressure differential goes through this check valve, and it's a one-way valve. It only goes this way. It doesn't allow pressure to go back that way. So it's building up pressure in the fuel tank up to about 8 psi at max operating RPM. And then this other little nipple down here is actually what goes to this nipple on the carb. So this is sort of how this thing will be set up. So the fuel is actually pumped, kind of, sort of, pumped from the bottom of this diaphragm into the carb here. And then there's no idle adjustment screw at all. There's no air bleed. The only thing is there's this throttle stop screw, and this is more or less what I believe now to be the idle adjustment screw. And it just allows the butterfly to move enough, and there's a hole in this butterfly that allows fuel at low pressure or at low RPMs to be drawn in. It's rather complicated, and I'm not really sure I fully understand it yet. But these are some of the reasons why, and this is kind of how it would look. These are some of the reasons why I'm choosing not to run this engine as it is and make a box to the bench review, because I really want to learn more about how this thing operates, make sure it's up to snuff as far as gaskets and especially this fuel regulator. Make sure that's all working properly before I attempt to run it. So, like I said, this is just a quick look at a YS F-120 engine, and in my research I believe that because of the way this back half of the carburetor air chamber is and this screw here, I was in contact with a tech rep from Central Hobbies, which is one of the main places that you can get spare parts for. He told me that the pictures I provided of this engine, that this screw indicates that this is probably a YS F-120 SF variant. Now if you go to the Central Hobbies site, you'll see parts breakdowns for all the different YS 120 engines there, and that was part of the difficulty, was to try to figure out exactly what this one was so that I get the right gaskets, because the gasket shape and the chamber changes between the SF to the NC and the can't recall what the other variant was at this time. It's rather complicated, and like I said, I'm in the learning stages about these engines right now, and it's pretty interesting to learn about. But anyway, that is an inside look of a YS F-120 engine. Obviously stay tuned. I will be doing some look inside videos as I go to tear this engine down and reassemble it, and when I get parts on order, and then obviously I'll be doing some run videos of it too. So that's the initial look at this wonderful classic YS F-120 engine.